Icon and then. All right, everybody, we're going to get started now. First of all, I'd like to call the meeting to order. It's November 27th, 2017. This is our second to last meeting before the end of the semester. Just a reminder, our last meeting is actually next week, December 4th. So make sure that's on your calendar. Our next meeting will be Monday, December 4th. This room, 5:30. We're really lucky to have a guest here tonight to present, and that guest is Vice-Chancellor of Diversity and Inclusion. That's Dr. Brenda Allen, and we have 30 minutes to give 30-minute allocation to her, but I'm very excited to introduce her, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Give it up. So good, would it be afternoon? Good evening? Good evening.
Good evening.
Not rhetorical, it's a true greeting. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, that's a little warmer. I really am pleased that you all allotted some time for me to come and talk with you. I really hope that we can make this a tradition. It's been sporadic since I've been in this role of whether or not I've been invited to engage with Student Senate. And again, I invite you to invite me and to make it part of what you do. Sometimes people say, well, you're so busy. Well, this is part of me being busy and really key for me. And I want to continue my opening remarks by expressing my gratitude for each and every one of you that you are indeed involved in Student Senate. above and beyond what your primary reason for being here. And this notion of thinking about inclusion is really key to what we're trying to accomplish on this campus. And I hope you figured out by now, regardless of your chosen profession, how significant it is that you will have had experiences. And I trust that you are taking the personal responsibility for your own professional development to cultivate inclusion. I'm going to speed through a variety of topics this afternoon that for which I often get 2 hours, a half a day, et cetera, to meet with groups. And again, though I appreciate this opportunity, something to consider is whether or not, depending on the other kinds of professional and leadership development you do, to invite me for maybe you do retreats or do particular kinds of events, both as related to Student Senate as well as within your chosen areas, that this is part of what I do. It's part of my role. So with that said, the title is the thesis, the premise. Cultivating inclusion matters. Cultivating inclusion is something that's significant, it matters, and there are many significant issues or matters we should think about in terms of cultivating inclusion. Let's begin with the fact that cultivating inclusion is really implied explicitly, implied in our strategic priority for our strategic plan for our campuses, which is strategic priority number 5, that we strive to enhance diversity university-wide and to foster a culture of inclusion. One statement that's within that statement is that, quote, our common humanity leads us to create an inclusive and respectful ethos characterized by caring, empathy, compassion, nurturing, collegiality, and mentoring. So those are some of the primary ways by which we strive to enhance diversity university-wide and foster a culture of inclusion. As I talk about diversity, it's really important to specify what we mean by diversity. Partially because, as you well know, you should always clarify your terms. Whenever you're talking about something, you should have some agreement of, here's what we mean by this. Second, what often happens in many settings these days, but in particular in higher education, when people say diversity, they tend to conflate it with race and ethnicity, specifically underrepresented racial ethnic background minorities. And here's another interesting dynamic there. Even as they do that, they sometimes hesitate to use the word race. And so what I say to and you can ask some of the other, my other colleagues in the Chancellor's leadership teams, is I say race is not a 4-letter word, right? That we need to recognize race does matter. It's an important part of all of our identities, whether we are white, black, et cetera, right? It matters to all of us to varying degrees. And however, diversity is not just race. So it's both thinking about race and recognizing other aspects of identity, and as important, recognizing intersections of those identities. I often invite people to think about, if you imagine my fists here as a beautiful jewel, as I know that's what you're thinking about me in general, but imagine that this is a beautiful jewel which has all these facets. That's us as human beings. We have all these facets, and sometimes it's important to foreground or highlight a facet, especially as we think about what we mean by inclusion, as what we mean about social justice, et cetera. So it's important to highlight that facet while never losing sight of the complexity. And the real idea is that every one of us in this room is already multicultural. If you think about culture as being an aspect of identity for which you have received socialization about, here's how you are blank. If you're a woman, if you're a trans person, if you are a lesbian, if you are, you get where I'm going with it, if you are first generation, if you are male, we all have been socialized about how to enact those aspects of our identity. And so that's culture. And so we're all multicultural. And that's the approach that I take in this work, which invites every one of us to think about how those issues of identity matter to us. More specifically, if you look at our strategic plan, we say our framework for diversity recognizes historically underrepresented persons/groups in the areas of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, veteran status, and ability status, coupled with nationality, religion, socioeconomic status, diverse experiences, perspectives, and attributes that can enhance the scholarly environment. So as I say this, I don't mean, however, that we should just say, okay, then we're all part of the human race. No, that's where we get into distinctions that matter as we also think about what do we mean by inclusion. So let's do a quick word association. When I say inclusion, what comes to mind for you? Just call it out. Inclusion. Anything. Inclusion. Connectedness. Great word. You'll see I have it in the slides later. Connectedness. Inclusion. Acceptance. Yes. Inclusion. Exclusion. Yes. Inclusion. I want three more. Inclusion. Welcome. Inclusion. Equality. Inclusion. Teamwork. All right, very good. Notice there was just one relatively negative term. It's important to note, and when I have time, I dig a little deeper to say that everyone isn't on board in terms of inclusion, especially if we think about inclusion as meaning we're including those who have tended to be excluded. There are lots of people who believe that certain people are less valuable, are incompetent, should not be included. There are also other words that go with inclusion that maybe we can capture when I invite you to just think broadly. Of course, I'm here talking positively and affirmatively, and I would trust that that's what comes to mind first is positive. I hope you also have positive sense of it, but it's important to recognize the complexities of the terms that we use. So now let's talk about, when I say the word inclusion, what kinds of feelings do you have or do you think others might have? Feelings or emotions? Inclusion, go. Positive, inclusion. Being left out, inclusion. Unfair, inclusion. Empathy, inclusion. Innate resistance, inclusion. Justice. This is excellent, excellent, excellent. And again, if we had time, we could go a little deeper, with the point being to recognize as we work with these kinds of concepts, how important it is to get in touch with the wide variety of connotations and denotations, the personal meanings as well as dictionary meanings, etc. In our case, and I appreciate you calling forth just in a minute or two the complexities of both the associations as well as the feelings or emotions. One thing that tends to happen in institutions of higher education as well as in organizations in general. My PhD is in organizational communication, and I'm a professor of organizational communication, which means I study what are ways that we strive to share meaning with one another in organized social collectivities with an emphasis on higher ed. And I'm particularly interested in power dynamics and social identity. How do we come to know who we are, and how do we perform those identities, that sense of who we are, as well as we look at others, our sense of who they are and are not. So that really informs and motivates me in this work. And when I talk about inclusion, and it's a way, this is what I want you to understand, the perspectives that I am inviting all of my colleagues, faculty, staff, students, community members, et cetera, and we look back at that diversity strategic priority, which talks about cultivating a culture of inclusion. What I mean by that is a space in which everyone, notice the all caps, that's bold, I am shouting at you, feel the wave, right? Underrepresented, represented, and well represented. Feels respected and valued. Now, that's an intentional, the parentheses are important because, again, thinking about ways that people tend to engage with language and meaning, and oftentimes don't step back to say, here's what we're doing. I have observed in higher education and other settings, when we talk about inclusion, what tends to happen is either people mean it's just everybody, as I said earlier, it's the human race, right? So that would mean, in terms of thinking about, also someone mentioned equality, to which I'd add equity, because equality means you give everybody a pair of shoes, right? Equity means you give everybody a pair of shoes that fits them, right? And so we're striving for both equality, giving everybody a pair of shoes, and equity, ensuring that people have the shoes that fit them. And so that's why I specify this underrepresented, represented, and well represented, because otherwise, what tends to happen is either we're thinking it's just everybody, or we're thinking it's only those who have been excluded. You follow me here? And with either of those approaches, to me, we just will not achieve our goals around diversity and inclusion. It's sort of like inviting a family of a very homogeneous family in terms of their race and nationality, background, et cetera. Let's say 2 parents and 2 kids. And one of the parents decides, I'm just going to now adopt some children very different, from different cultures, countries, or whatever. Not going to tell them about it all, just suddenly bring in, right, these new children who will have different needs, and the other children who are accustomed to certain ways of being and doing, now suddenly having, without anyone sharing with them, why are we doing this, what matters, how we will all value, then that can neglect the overall family union. Follow where I'm going here? I would imagine some of you have actually had experiences around diversity and inclusion efforts that that may seem, if you analyze them, to be based on this kind of perspective. What I want you to understand is that that's not how we're striving to do it around here. It means regardless of who you are, I worked with a group a couple of years ago on an exercise it's called the Privileged Beads exercise. Any of you ever done that one? It's a great exercise. I'm actually going to be doing it for the Anschutz Inclusivity Alliance in February. I'm going to do a big, ginormous privilege beads exercise. But that exercise invites every one of us in this room is always already privileged to a certain extent. We're privileged just by being literate on this earth, right? Of all the people on earth, we can read and write. And that's such a low percentage, and that's privilege. And it comes to us, the reason we are able to read and write is in large part due to where we were born. Has nothing to do, well, it has something to do with our capability, right, and our willingness to learn in our family. So it's not a total wash. And yet it is also important to recognize that part of why we're privileged has to do time and place and space and where we were born and the kinds of circumstances. Never meant as a shame, blame, but more as a actuality. So when we think about then it's important as we think about inclusion to recognize those kinds of distinctions that come with this notion of any one of us might be likely, as we think about all of the identity categories, even if you think about how we define diversity, in this room, we have combinations, right? Like for me, being straight, that's a privileged position. Being Black, that's a non-privilege, right? Being woman, being cisgender, et cetera. So we all are complex jewels when we think about identity categories, and it's important for us to keep that in mind in our inclusion efforts. So furthermore, there are factors of inclusion to consider. One is fairness and respect. So in order for us to achieve that goal of cultivating a culture of inclusion, and that's for us, for you all as students, that's for me as a faculty member and administrator, that's for community members, that's for patients, right? Everybody should feel respected and valued. And the 2 factors of inclusion are the idea of fairness and respect, right? That equity I mentioned later, and non-discrimination. However, research shows there's another part of that, which is the value and belonging. And that value and belonging is that sense that, for me, as an example, I feel as if my colleagues, when I was teaching my students, when I was also a department chair, so it'd be the other department chairs, you get where I'm going with this, I had a sense that they, not only would I be treated equitably, would I not experience discrimination, which is an important point, but also I would be valued and feel that I belong for my uniqueness, for my particular blend. So as an example, I was recruited to CU Boulder in 1989 from Howard University, which some of you may know is a historically Black university in Washington, D.C. So I came from Washington, D.C., which at that time we were calling Chocolate City, and into Boulder, and from a Black institution to a predominantly white institution. And that part of why they hired me is because they got a twofer. You know what a twofer is? Black and female, right? So too often when we talk about diversity, we do it like we're counting, we do it like we're acquiring, let's go get some, right? So in terms of student admissions, in terms of hiring, I'm trying to dissuade my colleagues from approaching it as acquisitional, and as if any person is only that aspect of their identities, right? So yes, I'm a Black woman and I love it. And I love how I've been socialized to perform Black womanhood. And by the way, it's my version. It's not every Black woman, right? And yet there's so much more to me than that. So inclusion says you value my uniqueness, that I feel truly engaged in decision-making processes, and that I feel connected, right? And so that, again, back to the notion that this is everybody should feel this. And it's important to recognize that the way our systems are set up, they tend to be set up more for members of dominant categories of all of those aspects of identity. And that means, as I was alluding to earlier, the one young man who said, wow, I feel like I hit the privilege jackpot because I'm straight, I'm white, I'm Christian, I'm US citizen, I'm able-bodied, you name it, right? I'm middle class. He went on. And I said, yes, and because this was an intensive seminar on teaching difference and diversity. And he was one of the most outstanding faculty students in that seminar. This is a faculty in-depth seminar. And I said, and that positions you to engage with students, as he went back to Wabash. Anyone know Wabash in Indiana? It's an all-male institution. He actually invited me there to work with some of his colleagues. Phenomenal. Anyway, I said, what you bring to this conversation around diversity and inclusion are perspectives that you might be able to reach certain groups and talk about these issues in ways that I might necessarily not be able to do. So the idea is, no matter who you are, to have that sense of uniqueness and value, and recognizing that systems, for the most part, have been designed for dominant groups. And this is not a shame or guilt kind of position. This is the real deal. This is reality. Any of you in here left-handed, raise your hand. Okay, just a few of us. Right-handed people, did you know the world is designed for you all? That you have privilege by being right-handed, and that we revere right-handedness by saying the Pledge of Allegiance, by saluting, by shaking hands, by, there are many things we do. Oftentimes classrooms that used to have the desks, if they had a left-handed desk, it would be a beat-up, raggedy desk over in the corner somewhere, right? If they had one at all. Irons, many things are designed. And by the way, there are some left-handed people who were complicit. They helped to design that stuff for the right-handed world. So that's how I introduced this notion of privilege, and even sayings that we have. So I was told that I owed the devil a day's work because I was left-handed. In some cultures, it's more extreme than that. That you actually, in terms of handedness and talking about you are dysfunctional, or some sort of creature, etc. Very similar to ways we have value judgments around members of other groups. So my point here is that privilege is a part of what our society, and the notion of what we do is designed with dominant groups in mind, because historically dominant group members are the ones who designed the various systems, right? And where we are now is trying to disrupt some of those, but in doing so, again, on our campus, we want those dominant group members to be as involved, to feel as valued, as much belonging as we do those that have been excluded. To touch into now that particular topic, I want to show you this video. It's about a 4-minute video, and it talks about something crucial when I do implicit bias training that I have found, especially in contexts like this, with smart people, with educated people, with people who are accustomed to thinking critically and analyzing things, as well as people who probably have limited exposure to understanding how we've been socialized is not universal, have limited exposure to the point that all of us are likely unconsciously to be biased, right, for and against different things. So this is a quick video I want you to take a look at. And as we view the video, I want you to begin to have a sense of its implications for what we're talking about in terms of inclusion. How can I turn that up?
Like when you look at this photo, you can see there's blonde hair.
Oh, there we go.
Has some choice words to you. Without an effort, you experienced fast.
Let me start over.
But if you
Thank y'all. Can you hear that though? It seems like it should be, was that okay?
Yeah, so you might have to turn up the volume on the
I
computer.
think it's a place here.
You can turn it up on the computer.
Yeah. Now let's blast them
It
out.
might be really loud.
Nah, it should be fine.
Let's see.
You may not realize it, but your brain actually processes information in two very distinct ways. Like when you look at this photo, you instantly know she has blonde hair, is visibly angry, and likely has some choice words to yell. Without any effort, you experienced fast thinking. But if you look at the following problem, something different happens. Sure, you immediately know it's a multiplication problem, and you knew you could solve it if you had the energy, but didn't. If you do try, your muscles will tense, your pupils will dilate, and your heart rate will increase. Now, you've experienced slow thinking. These two systems of fast and slow thinking dictate much of our perception and reaction in life. Take these lines, for example. It's clear that they're different lengths, but if you measure them, they're actually the exact same length. Even now that you know, System 1, or your fast thinking, can't stop seeing the illusion because it acts automatically. A similar effect is seen here. Which figure is the largest? Again, they're all the same size, but the suggestion of perspective and depth causes your System 1 to interpret the picture as three-dimensional, even though it's on a flat two-dimensional surface. It's making quick work of the available information, and so your conscious System 2, or slow thinking, must compensate after the fact and choose not to believe your intuition or instinct. Want to see your System 2 in action? I'll show you a string of 4 digits, you read them aloud, then add 1 to each of the original digits. If the card reads 3795, the correct response would be 4806. We'll then go to the next card and you'll do the same, followed by the next card. Ready? Go. Few people can cope with more than 4 digits, but even harder is add 3. The interesting bit is that though your pupils would have dilated, you often become effectively blind when you fully engage System 2. Did you notice the color of the text change? Or how about the fact that the numbers completely changed when I put them off to the side? Listen to the following puzzle. A bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Chances are your System 1 intuition was yelling 10 cents, but this appealing System 1 answer we know is wrong. In fact, the correct answer is 5 cents. Even if you worked out the correct answer, you likely thought of 10 cents along the way. System 1 is trying to work out an answer as quickly and seamlessly as possible, which is extremely beneficial in everyday life. If every activity required full mental effort, it would be exhausting. But knowing this allows us to understand that not all of our first impressions are correct. How many animals of each kind did Moses take into the ark? So few people detect what is wrong with this question that it's been dubbed the Moses illusion. In fact, Moses took no animals, Noah did. Again, our brain invests as little resources as necessary so that things run quickly and smoothly. Because Moses is not abnormal in the biblical context, System 1 unconsciously detects an association between Moses and ark and quickly accepts the question. In a similar way, System 1 generates context without you knowing. Reading each of the following may seem fairly simple. A, B, C, and approached the bank, and 12, 13, 14. But your brain actually interpreted these ambiguous statements without you ever knowing. You could have read it as A, 13C, or 12, B, 14, but your brain created the context unconsciously. Also, you likely imagined a woman with money on her mind walking towards a building with tellers. But if the sentence before this was, they were floating gently down the river, the entire scene would have changed because bank is no longer associated with money. Without an explicit context, System 1 quickly generates one based on previous experience. In this case, you've likely visited more banks than rivers, and so the context is resolved accordingly. This ties into a concept called priming. For example, if I said wash, how would you complete this word fragment? Most would see soap, but had I just shown you the word eat, you'd be more likely to see soup. In this way, both eat and wash prime your thoughts. Though System 2 likes to think that it's in charge and knows what's going on, the truth is that priming effects have even been shown to affect and modify behavior. These arise in System 1, and you have no conscious access to them. If you'd like to learn more about the thinking systems in your brain, check out the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which covers it.
So as I said, that the purpose of that was to, it's something that I often use in implicit bias training to help people get a sense of and recognize that Our tendencies toward implicit bias are based on how our brains operate, if we're fortunate enough to have normal cognitive capabilities, combined with ways we've been socialized. So that video, as you see, said nothing about whether or not, as research shows, have anyone of you heard the white sounding, black sounding name studies? Where sending resumes out, everything exactly the same except for a white sounding name or a black sounding name. And the premise is that those persons who were more likely to indicate an interest in a callback for persons with white sounding names and black sounding names is not to say that they were intentionally racist, but rather is to say that we've all been socialized to value or devalue groups based on their identity. And that's how implicit bias operates. What it is specifically those unconscious ways that we have been, that we are likely to tap into dominant stereotypes, assumptions, beliefs about members of other groups, even members of our own groups. So I am very guilty of what I call TUI, thinking under the influence of these dominant stereotypes, including those about my non-dominant group categories, including those about, for example, senior citizens, including those about Black people, including those about women, including those about older Black women, right? Combining those, that I'm as likely, even I, who have training, who've done this work a long time, et cetera, am likely to have those kinds of stereotypes. And if I don't recognize that, if I don't understand, if I don't believe, if I don't recognize that I'm likely to have those biases, just as the video showed about decision making, right, and about what you pay attention to and about how our brains tend to operate, then I may be likely to make decisions for or against different people in different ways. And those decisions include things like, what am I teaching? How am I teaching it? It includes things like, if I'm on a search committee, which resumes I look at, who do you want to hire? How do I interpret answers to interview questions? When I was a faculty member back at CU Boulder a long time ago, I somehow realized this tendency toward bias, and I would have students, that's back, you'll know what a typewriter is. When students were actually typing their papers, I would tell them to put their name on the back sheet of the last page so that I could read those essays and try not to impose, consciously or not, my sense of this, that's Cody, I know it's going to be excellent, right? Is to try to give everybody that equitable, that fair chance. So that's what implicit bias is. That's that likelihood that without recognizing it, it's a difference between explicit biases. You know that you know that you know, you have a preference for or against something, which bias is just that, very simply speaking. How many of you have a favorite color, a favorite food, a favorite, right? All of those are biases, and they aren't necessarily good or bad. And so we tend to have them, but when we have them and we're not aware, and they're implicit, they're unconscious, and they're about other human beings is what we're focusing on as we think about being more inclusive. And here are some of the categories that go into implicit bias: culture, education, religion, race, et cetera, age, in ways that could make a difference for you in your professions, for you in your relationships with one another, for you, you name it, that this could possibly kick in. This matters for a number of reasons. Again, when I have time, I invite people I would have you get into threes and make a long list of how does this matter to you in terms of your chosen profession, in terms of who you are as an individual, to share with one another if you've ever experienced it, et cetera. We don't have that time, but it matters just because of what I said. It influences our attitudes and behaviors. It shapes our perceptions. It can affect our decision-making. It's often incompatible with our conscious values. So it's important to recognize that this is not a finger pointing, you are, right? Because we all are like, we all have them. And they're always likely to influence what we do. And if we accept that, it matters that we recognize it as a real thing, and then we strive to do something differently or better about it. And there's lots and lots of research on implicit bias. This one I find fascinating. It's another one I tend to introduce first when I'm working with groups. So I did grand rounds for surgeons, for our surgery department. And in those cases, I do in-depth research. I try to find out, what does research say about that specific area. But I'd like to start, as I did with that video, about here's just how our brains work. Then I delve into, you know, what research shows in terms of who's more likely to be a surgeon in terms of demographics. And the higher up you go in the pay scale, who's likely to be there. These are not accidents, and they're not because some people are more superior and inferior. They're because of lots of biases along the way, including whether or not someone has ever seen someone like herself, himself, themselves in a particular role, and it goes beyond that. But this is a quick little one, and I do feel so constrained because I don't often just talk to people. I invite people to play a little with me. So as you're looking at that, let's play just for a moment, and I'll still plan to end at around 6:15. I do want to honor your time. What kind of bias, implicit bias, do you think might operate there? Who's making decisions? All of them are making decisions, but which decision probably matters most, that if there's some bias going on, then it's not going to have the impact, you know, it's not going to be accurate. Umpire, you got it. So this is 700,000 pitches thrown during the 2008 and 2009 seasons. The umpires tended to make errors in ways that favored certain kinds of players. Now, certain kinds of pitchers, right? So what kind of identity categories do you think umpires were more likely to call a strike when it wasn't a strike? Home field advantage is one, yes. No, good guess, but that doesn't seem to be part of what they studied, but very good guess. Not height, no. Not time of the game. Those are all great. This is the way to think in terms of the kinds of variables. Also, when I have time, I talk about conditions under which we're likely to be biased, and they include distraction, pressure, peer pressure, timing, time, etc. In this case, what happened was not only home field advantage, but all-star pitchers. So an all-star pitcher versus someone who's not known to be an all-star pitcher, that umpire, without realizing it, gave that person the advantage because they've been socialized that this is a better pitcher. Can you see how this can operate there when you think about other settings about who we are socialized can do things better than others, right? They also found, and that was the strongest association of implicit bias, that is to say, all-star versus not all-star. The second was in race. So white pitchers as contrasted with persons of color pitchers, right? So that race thing, we've all been ingrained with it. So there's more research than that. Don't have time to go through it. Take my word for it. Some of you may have heard of some of it. I encourage you, for whatever your chosen profession is, just to take a look to see what kind of research looks specifically at your profession, because it's a growing body of work and it's pretty fascinating. And it's helpful to know the likelihood of when one is likely to be biased in certain contexts, because then you can get in front of it. And ways you can mitigate include remember and admitting we all have them doesn't make us bad people. My thoughts are not me. And when I catch myself TUI, first of all, because I'm the officer and the judge and the jury, it never gets to court. I always get off with a warning. It's like, I know you can do better. And I'm like, yes, I know I can too. Thank you so much. But to remember that we all have biases doesn't make us bad persons at all. And in fact, remembering and agreeing that we do is a way forward for every single one of us. And when I have time, I tell people my latest realization that, dang, this stuff is so powerfully ingrained in all of us. Commit to managing yours. This is an invitation I give to my colleagues, some of whom will say, I just wish my supervisor was here. I just wish so-and-so was here. It's like, you're here, right? If you focus on you and trying to do better, we can make a difference. Learn more about biases, be mindful of, what is TUI again? Thinking under the influence of prejudices and stereotypes. Check your privilege. When you think about ways that you are privileged, again, I encourage you not to think of it. If you feel guilt or shame, just feel that for a moment. I'm never going to tell you to deny it, but then say, as you'll see later, turn it into something that says you're going to use your privilege for good. For me, when a colleague of mine, Dr. Anna Spradlin, and I've written about our experiences at CU Boulder, when she came out to me as a lesbian and told me ways that our curriculum, ways we even engaged day-to-day water cooler talk or whatever were so heteronormative, I felt ashamed because I was I was so much a part of that because I didn't know any better. But once I learned better, I started doing better and using my privilege for good. Solicit and offer feedback. A lot of times people who are members of underrepresented groups are aware of times when it seems that, hey, that might have been a little implicit bias there. So if you're in, in particular groups, if you say you're willing to learn and get feedback from one another, we do it at in the Chancellor's leadership team, and it's made a big difference. Redirect any guilt or shame you might feel. Starting with that thinking fast and slow, right? There are a lot of times when we just do things and we do knee jerk, or we don't look at all the information, like the Moses effect, right? Like the Anne approached the bank, etc. And remember, all of these kinds of connotations and denotations are in systems that were designed by and for certain groups more than others. And so we will be likely to do that unless we slow down. Control those conditions for bias. Think of each person as a whole complex person. Not, again, just saying we're all human race, but to say there are some characteristics I think I recognize that you may or may not matter to you, and you are a whole person with the complexities of those identities. As I think about healthcare and health disparities, I hope that you're not getting lessons only that speak to members of underrepresented groups in negative and dysfunctional ways, nor that they always are prescriptive. So if you talk with a patient who's X, you should blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe, maybe not, right? Understanding the complexities and the individual experience. Just like you know yourself, no matter what your identity composite is, you know you are a complex individual, right? And you may have some awareness of aspects of your identity seem to matter in your favor or against your favor, but you also are aware that there are other parts of who you are. And so that's where we get to the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Now, that doesn't mean you don't put the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You have the golden rule. This is your toolbox. You knew what that was, though, right? No, you're like, what is she doing? But this is your toolbox. So you have the golden rule in there and the platinum rule, right? And figuring out what matters to others. It's as Aretha Franklin sang and Otis Redding wrote, RESPECT, what? Yeah, it's a pretty simple kind of rule. And if you haven't observed it yet across your lives, I encourage you to start doing so. And if you have, then pay more attention to it. Respect means different things for different people and at different times, and depending on the relationship with the other person. So platinum rule, work within your sphere of influence, right? Where you can, and you already have a sphere of influence. You already have persons and places and so forth that listen to you, that are watching you, observing you in terms of how they might behave. And so recognize that. As students in a student senate, you have a phenomenal sphere of influence to make a difference when it comes to all of these issues around inclusion. To close out, I'm developing a concept I call affirmative interaction, and that gets at specific ways to cultivate an inclusive culture that are actual verbs of behaviors that mean you're affirming another person. And it's not just a 2 thumbs up as a superficial, hey, way to go, but it's really you paid enough attention, you are committed, you're striving to affirm others as you engage with them in whatever kind of context. And from that, I've generated a list of verbs, and I'm gonna kind of wrap it up now. As these verbs come up, I want you to read them out loud and think about what they mean in terms of if you engage with others, this is a way that you demonstrate you are interacting inclusively with them, regardless of their identity categories.
Be present, notice, acknowledge, support, advocate, mentor, understand, empathize, discuss, advise, inform, recognize, educate, include, give, feedback.
I need to change that one.
Assist, sponsor, value, appreciate, commend, promote, train, consult, learn from, interest, solicit feedback, invite input, reward, guide, yield, believe, believe in, stand up for, compensate, assign, nominate, coach, congratulate, endorse, honor, greet, apologize, distinguish, credit, integrate, see.
All right, so not only am I encouraging and inviting us, right, to think about how we interact with others, you should expect others to interact with you in the same way. Our equity office has this slogan, it's like respect expected. right? And these are just some of the ways you can readily become much more inclusive. And notice it's not just a one way, I listen to you or I support you, but also I want your input. Going back to that notion of connectedness, feeling valued, feeling like you're a part of decision making. So it's not just me sponsoring you, for instance, as a student, it's also me, as I am asking you in closing, if you have any ideas, if you have any feedback about experiences you're having that are positive, that you would want more of, if you think of ways that we can do better, if I can support you, if we can collaborate in ways that really, really take this campus to the next level in terms of cultivating inclusion, I welcome those. So closing then, in terms of affirmative interaction, in addition to the recommendations regarding implicit bias, is just try to be fully present with others. One of the best gifts you can give to another human being is to be present and to say, there's nothing that matters to seem in your interaction, there's nothing that matters more to me than this interaction with you. And when you think about your chosen profession, that becomes crucial, because otherwise, again, some of those implicit biases based on your sense of a patient or a peer or a community member or a family member, whoever else might be, will begin to tell through your looking at your watch, through not paying close enough attention, to asking a question that a person has already answered, but you've been distracted thinking about something else because you're not fully present. I trust you get my point there. Monitor your thoughts. And if you discover you're having these kinds of prejudicial thoughts, for instance, if someone says or does something, you find yourself thinking, wow, that was pretty smart. Wouldn't have expected that. Don't blame yourself. Just recognize the good job society has done on all of us, right? But if you're honest with yourself, you're going to realize and recognize ways that it's probably a sign that I've had some kind of prejudice or attitude, both positive and negative, for or against others. Be proactive, be response able. You learn more about conditions under which bias is likely to show itself in anything that you're doing. You can get in front of it. So for instance, I talked about search committees. I've developed, based on lots of promising practices and researches, ways that committees who make decisions can be much more thoughtful, can be much more present, can actually be less likely to rely upon, here's how we do things around here. So being proactive. You may know Stephen Covey talks about that as being response able, right? So you know something that's likely to happen and you're able and ready, you have your toolbox to respond. When you include, really include. Not just, okay, let's be sure we have a student's member on this search committee, and the student gets in there and it's sort of like, you know, an afterthought. Oh, by the way, Cody, did you have anything? If asking Cody at all, right? Or if Cody says something, maybe there's a sense of, okay, that was great, but, right? Or Cody or any other student, or oftentimes that notion of representing means a person of color and or a woman, or if you get, again, a twofer, check, check. But not necessarily seeming to really say, I value what you have to offer. And also recognizing, being culturally responsive, that power dynamics are such as some people are more likely to speak up during a meeting than others. So then you create conditions in which you say, let's send me your feedback in advance so I can incorporate it in what we're doing. Or if you have additional ideas, share them with me, right? So there are different ways you can include people. Be an upstander. This comes from bullying work. Talking about people, especially peers or people who are peers of the bully or the person who's engaging in the dominant behavior. It amazes me, a lot of the things we're learning, well, that are being alleged, and some of them have actually been proven regarding sexual harassment and assault, of how many of their peers, of the persons who are accused, knew about it, right? And for me, that feels more egregious than people who are in the victim, both victim as well as the non-dominant group. So especially when you're peer-to-peer with someone, and that's where I'm working within my sphere of influence as a Vice-Chancellor, to talk with my peers in ways that others may not be as comfortable. So strive to be an upstander. And finally, please keep learning and growing and be excited about it. You can make such a phenomenal difference. First of all, in the experience you and other students are having while you're here, and as important when you go forward to do the phenomenal work that you are studying here to do. I really appreciate the time and hope you will invite me either here again or in some other setting where anything I can do to help you in terms of diversity and inclusion, and especially when we think about inclusion meaning every person, and thinking about the revered work that you are doing and you will do. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Dr. Allen?
Hi, what's your name? Hi.
You spoke to us in our community class, but I was wondering who here on this campus receives implicit bias training?
Who receives it? Excellent question. Right now, who receives this type of training are people who ask for it, right? And they may ask for it in a couple of different ways. They may like really ask for it because of their behavior, and someone says, okay, you need training. But it's more about people voluntarily, groups voluntarily saying, we want to know more about this. So we don't currently have this as any kind of mandate. I can say, and I won't name them, there are certain schools and colleges and departments that are much more engaged and involved than others. And I see that as much about leadership, as much about demand, as much about whether or not you as students are saying, we believe this matters enough. I'm pleased to say that I've done a couple of these for staff council on both campuses, and they, in their feedback, say we should really try to require this for everybody because it can make an immediate difference. A lot of diversity training feels so daunting and it's so hard to figure out what to do next. But with this, it's pretty clear about the steps that people can take. So thank you so much for your question.
Any other questions for Dr. Allen? Let's give her one more round of applause.
There's how you can reach me. And I will send you the PowerPoints.
Great.
In case you'd like them. Yeah, there's something else to consider is the implicit association test. And have you ever heard of those? Fascinating way to kind of get a sense of, you know, how you personally have been socialized around identity categories. Thank you again very much. I really appreciate all that you all do.
So I'd like to pull out one of the affirmative interaction terms and say we've learned from Dr. Allen today. And thank you again for coming. We're going to jump back into the committee sessions here. So please break out into your committee groups. We're going to cut it down to about 10 minutes. Afterwards, if any of the committees have any events coming up, please, I'll call on you and we'll have everybody announce when their events are. So break out into your committees, please, and we'll meet back here in about 10 minutes.
If you've not signed the attendance roster, please come do so.
All right, come back into it. So the first, moving on, we're a little bit, we're getting a little late here. So we're going to start with approval of last meeting's minutes. Do I hear a motion on the floor? Any second? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? All right, motion passes. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the, I'm going to be very brief. We had a ASAL breakfast with the executive board. ASAL is the associate deans from all your respective colleges. We also had Randy, the police chief, Randy Rapallo. Oh my gosh. It's getting late. But we had the police chief there as well as some other people from ASAL. ASAL encompasses a wide range of different things. And it was very productive. We had a lot of talk about student needs, student wants, as well as how to address some dogmas on campus. I think a big thing we talked a lot about was mental health on campus and how students gauge their progress by their peers. There was also talk about collaboration with philanthropy events and student life events as well going forward. And more communication. I think there was some, there was going to be a prospective newsletter from the deans themselves to the individual schools. I don't know how many of you actually read all your emails, but who here reads an email from their dean, or their associate dean? Not that many. I always say elevators are the best way to go, but all right, so we talked about just improving lines of communication between students, getting information out to students about events that Senate is putting on, that other schools are putting on, things like that. So that's also in discussion. We're going to have more discussions in the next couple, next semester and then going forward. I'm going to turn it over. That's all for the president's report. Turn it over to the treasurer, Michael and Jason. Anything to report?
Nothing to report.
Cool. Moving on to unfinished business. Does anybody have any? I don't think we have any unfinished business. We took our photos last meeting. We have those. I've sent those to Heather and Will, the link. The link kind of brings you to everybody's photos. So we're kind of working out ways to distribute them effectively. Okay. Will, do you want to send the link to everybody? I don't. Yeah.
Is everyone okay with everyone seeing their picture?
Is everybody okay with everybody's professional photo? No. We could put a motion on the table and vote yes or no if you want to do that. So, is there discussion about sending out the pictures as a whole? Send it. Okay, send it. We'll send it.
I thought they were for us to be able to provide to our student bodies and say, oh, this is me, I'm a senator.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that just we took this position to
take photos.
To hire,
Mm-hmm.
to keep those.
Yep. And we're also going to look into, and this is something I'm going to talk more with the communications committee about, getting like a little poster with your face on it. They could put in your sack with your email address. I hear a lot of hesitation there. We could talk more about that in new business. Yeah, we can put it into a.
Yeah, dry erase marker next to it so you can draw a mustache or something. I think I read. Oh, there's no mustache.
All right, guys, we're gonna table that discussion for now. We're gonna move on to the new business. So in the first order of new business is proposals for the chancellor. We don't have ASAC funding this year. ASAC was like a big pool of money that was meant to instill student improvements around the school with student involvement. However, we are able to make proposals to the chancellor for funds. In the past, ASAC funds have purchased things like the standing desks and the water fountains. This year, if anybody has any ideas, I'm going to open the floor up if there's any ideas for things you want on campus, things you think the campus needs more of, if you want more standing desks, more water fountains on different levels, you want exercise bikes. Yeah.
How about toilet seat covers in the bathroom.
That's a great funding proposal. And actually, that's not even that much of a funding proposal. It just seems like a sanitary hygiene thing. I like that idea. I like that idea a lot, and that's something we're gonna write down and reach out to Dave Turnquist about, because I think that's something that can be done really easily. But think grand for these proposals. I know we got a bunch of nap pods. Yep.
Well, how many standing desks did we end up getting? Only our sample amount?
I am not sure about that.
They're only in
Two classrooms? Are they heavily? I don't even know the utilization. If you've seen, are those the ones that? They're being used as seated desks right now. They're hiding.
Maybe there should be a sign on it so people know that they're there. Because like new students are coming into the class.
That is very true. Huh. So we need more labels, toilet seat covers and labels. It sounds like, yeah.
So, I know it doesn't really apply to everybody, but some campus really uses
Absolutely.
Everybody wants some water. You guys have a water dispenser thing? We don't have any of those. We'd really like to get just one installed.
I think that's a excellent proposal. Will, are you writing all these ideas down? Toilet seat covers, standing desk signs, water fountain for South like bottle fillers for South Campus. Any other ideas? This is great. Great job. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good proposal. Absolutely. Eco-friendliness.
Yeah. They have a refillable, like have a refillable.
Yeah, only reusable Keurig pods. I can tell you that there are, for faculty and stuff, some reusable, and they end up being donut.
Yeah, that's what I was
And then they end up really,
Also, like if you're supposed to descale those machines and change out the filters, like who's gonna actually do that?
The library.
For the cost, like if you don't maintain them, it's not worth it. So
Yeah.
just things to think about.
Yeah, I think that's another good idea. Something we can think about and get together and discuss with this proposal. Any other good ideas here? These are all fantastic.
I saw somebody in the fitness center having a meeting, and I think it would be cool to have a rental service for the little pedal things, but that you do it at your desk. So if we had like a test few that we could rent out to students to see if they use them. So you can like have something to do with your feet, like rather than the standing desk, it's actually a mobile thing. Or there's cool ones that's on the internet. I don't know. They clip here and it's like a flip swing.
What?
It's just like right here at your desk.
I'm afraid it would be very distracting. Very distracting.
Is there noise with that?
Maybe in the library.
Yeah.
In the walking desks and things.
That's true. Yeah.
So maybe
Um,
somebody wants to sit
Yeah,
in
I think the flip swing is silent. I don't know about the pedal.
I know me easily distracted.
Uh-huh.
Like, stop
Yeah.
pedaling.
I think that's a great idea. Again, this is something we can look into. Yep.
I would like a sunscreen dispenser.
That's another great idea. Fantastic. Will, you're writing, he's got all these. So a sunscreen dispenser there are a lot of people that go outside. I think it's perfect.
So one thing that we talked about like at our last retreat was getting trained to train resiliency trainings and stuff like that. So that would also be cool. Like it's not as infrastructure-y as what we're talking about here, but like, and that's something I was just reading over what people on the campus want, some of which doesn't fit into this conversation, but that's one thing that's up here a couple times is resiliency training. So if we got trained to do it, then we could then reach out to our classes and like be able to do stuff like that.
I think that's a great idea too. And that was something that we could talk about because Abby Beecham is open to training. There is that need. I think that's a great idea as well. These are all great ideas.
Maybe I just don't know where they are. Are there vending machines anywhere on campus? Today I really was hungry and the coffee place was already closed and I was like, I could just go get a vending. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
But be aware that the credit card number never works.
So healthy vending machines is also something the healthcare promotion committee is promoting. There is a full there's like a microwavable food vending machine in the new library space that has like hot pockets and things. Yeah, very healthy. But that's like a full meal instead of an apple or something. All right, guys, we're gonna table discussion for this. Thank you for all your ideas. Will, you got all those? I wanna look them over, start putting some together. Yeah.
Since this is going to be for the entire campus, while we're tabling this for tonight, make sure that you're going back to your schools and your classes and finding out if there's something maybe that they want to, so that we can get even, yeah.
Oh.
I could see that one.
Yeah.
Just so that, we're making sure that we're including everyone.
All right, last piece of the discussion.
For the chancellor's proposals, are those supposed to be like structural changes, or could it be something like the training?
It could,
just like student impact.
It could definitely be something like the training with student impact. It could be. Yeah, everyone will say long puppies. All right, moving on to the next order of business. There has been an idea put forward about holding a spring retreat. This wouldn't be something it'd be something completely new and different from what we had in the fall. It would probably just be like a Friday night thing or a Monday night thing where we'd go to Topgolf, have a brief meeting there, and then get to golf and hang out with each other for a bit. So I'd like to get your thoughts on what a spring retreat would look like and what you want from a spring retreat. If anybody has any ideas in terms of, yeah.
Could it be on a day where you are obligated?
Yeah, it could definitely be on a Monday. Absolutely.
I know that one of the ideas for kind of reducing the fall retreat was to save money by not spending it on a hotel room that kind of seemed possibly unnecessary. What's the cost difference? Like, what are we looking to save by talking about, going to Topgolf or something like that for the whole Senate? Is that going to be something that we can afford if we want to reduce by half the fall retreat? What are we going to put towards this retreat? Or do we see it?
So the reason that Topgolf was thrown out there was because Dominic is Dominic's brother, Dominic is in the Office of Campus Student Services. I don't know his position exactly. However, his brother is the general manager at Topgolf, and we were going to use some inside connections. But having some sort of get together, even if it's not at Topgolf, if it's something at like Cedar Creek instead, or we have appetizers and things, and then we have our meeting, something like that would be kind of what I was thinking, where you have that dedicated time where people could just hang out.
To be something that we would spend excessive money.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
Would the meeting portion potentially be like another training or?
Yeah.
Professional development?
So there would be some training with regards to like event planning and things like that, room booking, and then really more brainstorming about what worked well in the fall, what can we do in the spring to make things smoother. It'd be really those two categories. That's pretty much what the meeting would entail. You guys kind of like that? Cool, we'll move on. All right, table the discussion. Next, we have graduating senators. So in the past, what we've done for graduating senators is you've gotten a cord. I'm not sure what kind of cord you got that designated you as a senator. However, we have 5 senators that are graduating this winter. Yeah, I think they all left, actually. I think they're all out of the room by now. So we have 5 senators that are graduating, and it was one of the things I wanted to put forward was if anybody had any preferences about cord color or types of cords you wanted. I don't know what we've done in the past. I thought we did a mixed cord, I think black and yellow or something, probably. Does anybody have any color choices that they want? Rainbow, LED lights, anything? You guys kind of like the traditional black and yellow or silver. So that's what I wanted to know as well, is if anybody gets cords from their schools, or if you've seen cords from your schools that like are yellow or solid black or maybe a mixture, so we're not overlapping. Okay. That's what we're trying to. No one's got a rainbow.
Everybody says that. Everybody's like, let's go rainbow this year.
Is there a way to attach like a small pin? That would be neat.
Like a Senate pin?
Yeah, like a small pin to the cord. Like a logo on it. Instead of the cord? No. On the cord.
Like a small pin.
Can we get like a WWE?
I don't know about that. All right, we'll also table this discussion. We'll follow up with it. But if one thing I do want to ask you is, please email myself or Will if you know of any senators that are, past or present, that are graduating this winter. Let us know. I think we have like almost everybody I can think of that's graduating this winter. But if you know of anybody else that might be, was on Senate in the past and is graduating and maybe hasn't been involved in a couple years, reach out to them and say, hey, I know you're graduating. Would you like your Senate cord? Talk to Cody or Will. Please do that. And that's all I think we have for new business. Does anybody else have any new business? Yeah.
Well, one announcement, we do have a meeting next Monday. Let's keep that in mind, only one for December. And then what meeting are we gonna have in January?
So we start the 8th, I believe, is the first meeting. Wow. Yeah, we'll talk more about that next week. I think when we were voting to change meetings, that one we didn't cover that. No. So.
Also keep in mind that when we're having meetings, if your school is not in session, then you aren't required to, like, if you're in the area, you can, but not.
Right. You're not required to be here if your school is not in session. All right. Before we turn it over to OCSS, let's talk about any committees that have announcements within their committees, like about events coming up or anything like that. We'll start with legislative.
So we have a citizen advocacy training a week from now. So it's the 4th at 12 o'clock. We'll have pizza. You come and you learn how you could advocate right now on the legislative level, which is cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
It'll be somewhere in Ed 2. We'll send you guys we'll have a flyer.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. All right. I saw Philanthropy has an event coming up.
Yeah, tomorrow. Philanthropy is holding a volunteer opportunity at the Ronald McDonald House. We're going to make dinner there for all the families. So we sent out a flyer and we wanted 10 volunteers and we got a ton of interest. So I had to start turning people away, which is good. He's going to be having more things in the future. And then we just, before Thanksgiving, we had the Epworth Foundation's Feed a Family event. And we had like 15 to 20 volunteers show up to that. And it's this massive football field size assembly line where we put together Thanksgiving meals in boxes. There's hundreds of people volunteering. It was a super cool event and happy to be a part of it. Blair got us in the newspaper today.
Great job. Nice, Blair. Great job. Great job, Philanthropy. Great job. Communications, getting everybody in there. Any other announcements? Yeah.
So we had the International Education Week 2 weeks ago. And then we ended up having 200 people attend altogether. We had about 100 show up for the seminar and for the craft day, and then 101 RSVPs for the banquet and the talent show that was held on that Friday. So we did end up serving a lot of people. We're hoping to increase the communication about that next year and make it a bigger event, hopefully more days other than just 2 days. And then we're also planning just a small event for Children's Hospital We're gonna find out the children that are have to stay over the holidays in the hospital. And so next week on both Thursday and Friday, diversity is just gonna set up a small table, hopefully on the bridge, with some craft supplies as well as hot chocolate or coffee. We haven't quite decided. Just kind of a quick thing to find out how many children are in there, which we'll have, and then we're gonna make cards for them and
That's
write
nice.
little notes and things like that so that they get some gifts while they're there for the holidays.
I like that. That's a great event. Awesome. All right. Yeah.
All right, we have Blue Lights next month. So finalized details will come out next week.
Awesome. All right.
We have nothing.
Nothing for OCSS. All right. Again, meetings next week, next Monday. Yeah. Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Do I second? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? It's got to be one abstention one time. All right, guys. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.